I would begin with today's session, and I welcome you all to our Inception meeting on the Network for Renewable Energy Research and Advocacy. It's a part of our action on clean energy transition in Pakistan, and SDPI is researching the way forward for sustainable development from an energy lens. The basis of our research is Pakistan's recent alternative renewable energy policy with a plan of inclusion of 30% renewables and 30% hydro in the energy mix. Achieving this target will require several measures from both supply and demand. In this regard, we have developed evidence-based research, and based on that, we would like to advocate the need for this transition through establishing a network for this renewable energy research, clean energy research, and advocate and disseminate the relevant research to stakeholders throughout the country. And it will also have both national and international participation with experts and stakeholders to enlighten this network. To begin with, I would like to give floor, first of all, to introduce some of the esteemed panelists who have already joined in, and some of them will be joining in a few minutes. So we have Dr. Christoph with us from Beijing, China. He is from Institute of Green Finance, working on greening BRI, greening Cpec. We have Mr. Jahan Mirza, CEO, PPIB. We have Dr. Najeeb from University of Peshawar. We have Dr. Fatima from Engro, from the private sector. We'll soon be joined by Ms. Hadika from Ministry of Climate Change. And we'll also be joined by a journalist, Mr. Jawad from Lahore Chambers of Commerce. So before I move on to disseminate the knowledge we have gained through our research, I would like to invite the Executive Director of SDPI for his opening remarks, and then we shall continue. So Dr. Abid, over to you, please.
Thank you, Hina. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from China, especially Christopher and others. It's a great pleasure to welcome you for this Inception meeting of Network for Renewable Energy Research and Advocacy. And as Hina mentioned in her opening remarks, SDPI, we are not only knowledge producer and research organization, but we believe in bridging that research policy gap as well. And we are mindful of the fact that research, unless and until it is properly advocated and it's properly disseminated to the right corners, its practical value that gets diminished. And that is one of the purposes of having this network on renewable energy research and advocacy network. But going forward, we are quite encouraged by recent commitments from government of Pakistan, and I'll start with the latest one. Prime Minister, while addressing the UN Climate Summit, the recent summit virtually, whereby he resolved and he promised that by 2030, 60% of our energy sources, those would be clean and green sources. But even before that, if we look at our alternative renewable energy policy 2019 and our various other targets, we will find that Pakistan has committed to include renewable as well as hydro sources of energy. But making commitment is one thing, and then materializing it and removing the bottlenecks and hurdles that would come on way, that is something different. And we are again, know that it's a collective responsibility. Government perhaps on its own would not be able to take care of this gigantic task, which not only include the enabling policies for promoting renewable energy, but also trying to think of a holistic framework. For example, if now we are promoting the electrical vehicles, that would require, of course, investment of not only in electrical vehicles, but also in charging station, and also giving signals to the existing motor vehicle assemblers in the country so that they can start changing their technology. Likewise, when we talk of shifting towards renewable energy sources, this is a time when we will have to inform some of the multilateral and bilateral investors and creditors who are investing in Pakistan's energy sector to start exploring the new venues and new renewable energy sources mayors. And on top of it, of course, investing in transmission and distribution mechanism so that once that energy comes in the system, whether our transmission and distribution mechanism and systems would be able to carry it. Another agenda item or another thing on our wish list is, of course, to have a holistic reform in the power sector and in the energy sector, not only with a way to reduce our power sector circular debt, but also try to see that how we can somehow divert our existing resources from traditional sources of energy to the clean and green sources of energy. So the agenda is quite broad, the agenda is quite ambitious, and that is why I said that perhaps no single agency or no single department, no single ministry would be able to do it. Of course, we need to have a focal agency and focal ministry, but it would be the cooperation and it would be the collaboration of all relevant stakeholders, be they in academia, in research, in media, to join heads and hands and come up with some sort of complementary policy and complementary recommendation to materialize what has been envisioned in alternative renewable energy policy framework of 2019. And on behalf of SDPI, I can assure that from our part, we'll definitely keep on producing unbiased, impartial research, highlighting both the pros of alternative and renewable energy sources, which are very evident, but also highlighting the bottlenecks and the hurdles that either on policy side or on practice side that may compromise utilization of that renewable energy, and being part of solution, coming up with some practical and pragmatic ways of removing those hurdles. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope as part of this network, we'll be able to make a difference. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abid, for this valuable contribution and setting this stage for our next conversation on this. With this, I would begin with sharing my screen to present our ongoing research advocacy project on prospects of clean energy transition in Pakistan. To begin with, what made us realize and what would be the purpose of this network comes from the baseline of a research component that we have done under this project, where we are trying to analyze and determine the prospects of clean energy transition in terms of financing, in terms of policy making, considering the ongoing and the historical changes, the challenges we have in energy and power sector of Pakistan already. In terms of research focus and the key objectives, SDPI is researching the way forward with a key focus on national determined contributions, SDGs, national energy policies, and other national and international commitments. Achieving the desired targets for this require measures on both demand and supply, and this is how we are using these evidence to establish this network for renewable energy research and advocacy, broader objectives. So the two objectives that you must have received in our invitation as well is to generate a debate to reconsider further investments in fossil fuels and lead a pathway towards renewable energy and clean energy options, focusing on achieving the SDG target, the targets on carbon dioxide mitigation, air pollutant emission reduction, as well as economic growth, job creation, together with all these policy and technological options towards the transition. The second objective is to help and support the government with updated knowledge and research-based evidence to support and facilitate their decision-making in the all development priorities of Pakistan. In the terms of work context, we aim to develop a kind of a strategy for this clean energy needs and have solutions that can be considered by the policymakers. So the intermediate objectives are to study the risks that could be involved with investments in coal towards the clean energy transformation in Pakistan, and to conduct the evidence-based advocacy impacting both Pakistani and Chinese stakeholders under the umbrella of Cpec. The project deliverables from the research component, we have produced a policy paper on Pakistan's way forward towards a green economy, perspectives for a clean energy transition. It's based on desk review and qualitative research methods on the technical, financial, and environmental risks of the energy sector. The second deliverable we have is a case study on Thercoal field, analyzing the prospects of Thercoal investments and the potential of clean energy transition or renewable energy development in Ther. It's based on the site visit and qualitative research methods, also on technical, financial, and environmental risks of Thercoal investment for Block 1 and Block 2 that we had visited. These are some of the outcomes and some of the infographics we have produced out of our deliverables. Just to, if I could highlight this, because we want to keep these two deliverables dynamic for the next 4 to 5 months of this project. And we would like to seek your contribution and consultation in these documents before it gets finalized at the end. That's why it's not been disseminated yet, but it has been peer reviewed by some of the experts here in Pakistan, and it will be continued for further international review later on. So these are some of the infographics that we shall be sharing through through email after this this meeting, and we shall be continuing to have your contributions, to have your comments on it, to make it more improved and make it more updated. So as mentioned about the methods that we have used to produce those research is both quantitative and qualitative, in which we have had experts and interviews from the actors that are involved. And also we had focal group discussions on role of EPAs in clean energy transition of Pakistan, role of startups in clean energy transition, and the potential role of Chinese and Pakistan leaders in RE transition of Pakistan. That was a public-private dialogue held earlier in last year, in December. So the actors involved were both policymakers from regional, national level, public economic actors, experts, investor side from both Pakistan and China, also other societal actors such as NGOs, CSOs, unions, and some journalists who are part of advocating this. These are some of the photos of our visit to Tharkol field in consultations with the community, with the private sector representatives who could provide us and equip us with the sufficient knowledge to produce this evidence. So just to provide an overall methodology that we have done is the data collection through research papers, national reports, both international and national, the economic surveys, World Bank data sets, and the other data sets that we have from the national agencies. The assessment types is again both qualitative and quantitative. The tools that have been used are LCOE-based assessment, scenario-based modeling using LEAP. Mathematical modeling has been used, multi-criteria decision analysis, in vivo qualitative analysis using the tools that have been mentioned. The output results are we have future energy profiles, investments in the energy sector needed, the financial models, environmental profiles, prioritized actions need to be taken, short-term and long-term actions that could benefit us. So in the times of interpretation, it will lead to policy pathways, sustainability frameworks and networks, and stakeholder involvement. If I could just touch upon some of the basic results that we have from a case study on socio-environmental assessment done through multi-criteria decision analysis. In terms of the impacts of coal mining itself on the ecological side, in terms of releasing anthropogenic chemicals, having impact the biological environment and the nutrient cycle, also having impact towards the social side in health and well-being of plants, animals, and humans that are exposed. Loss of water-related services due to the water extraction that is part of the coal mining. Also impacting and disturbing the agricultural land of the Thar, or some expansion that is expected of further mine development. Another that could, of course, the first point is associated with any of the mining is the role of removal of topsoil and vegetation that leads to erosion, that leads to the changes in hydrological flow regimes, causing increased risk of erosion. Disturbance of land, so leading to high levels of dust near the mining activity and impacting the communities and the people, socio-ecological system surrounding the site. In terms of policy paper, in terms of prospects of renewable energy, we determined to have significant prospect from an investment point of view. Pakistan is reported to have solar potential of approximately 2.9, and wind energy offers a technical potential of around 360 gigawatts. And we also see a potential of commercial use of biomass per year. As per the alternative renewable energy policy, the new renewable energy plants will be adding around 7,000 megawatts of capacity by 2025. That will be 20% of total generation. Hydropower already has a high share in total energy mix, which is also expected to increase to 30%. And if Pakistan manages to achieve this total of 60%, it would be a tremendous achievement for this transition and the energy and the power sector of Pakistan. And if we look in the economic terms, it could have cumulative savings of around 5 billion in the next 20 years, USD. In terms of financial models, based on the economic model, incorporating the emission cost with a plant capacity factor to be 85%, it will have an average LCOE cost of PKR 11.7 Although the natural gas alone is cheaper, but this value of coal is around 1.44, which is less than the average LCOE of the other thermal plants. As per the proposed and already built plants, Thar coal can annually generate approximately 49 billion of electricity, and the use of coal generation instead of oil, gas-based plants can save around 70 billion PKR. Based on the updated tariffs and further decline in the generation costs, renewables offer even more LCOE, OE as compared to local imported coal. An average wind power expected to be produced at a rate of the numbers given in the screen. And however, this does not mean that all plants should be based on the cheapest or the cleanest source. Policymakers needs to have ensure diversity in the energy supplies. Some of the infographics that we have produced and will be disseminated later on, it's about the policy recommendations and the way forward. In terms of, from the policy paper, there are highlights of how to prioritize areas for promoting renewables by integrated energy plan, the right stakeholder involvement, renewable energy zoning, and decentralization of energy systems. Enhancing green trade policies and technology transfer, subsidizing renewables, global transfer deployment, mass deployment of technologies, technology promotion schemes, responsible and committed investments, energy transition guidance for Cpec, how to build a pipeline for renewables, investment in transition and exploitation of renewables, role of nuclear and hydrogen-based economy in terms of planning for the long-term changes and the prospects of foreseeable future. In terms of greening Cpec, there should be public and private investments and interventions related to integrated water resource management, sustainable land management practices, gender-based equality, women's empowerment initiatives, groundwater management strategies, climate adaptation mitigation strategies, local and institutional capacity, and formulation of policies from both China and Pakistan under Cpec. In terms of role of financing and policy making, setting the portfolio standards, the options of carbon credit schemes, certification schemes, FITs and FIPs. All these are preliminary and are produced based on the data we had collected till November. And of course, there are lots of recent developments that are happening in the sector with new initiatives and developments. One of them is highlighted by Dr. Abid Suleri in his opening remarks about the PM's intervention on the 5th anniversary of Paris Agreement, that we would not be relying on the coal-fired power plants in the future. And that is encouraging to see lots of opportunities coming in our way and having our eyes on and making our way forward towards this. So collectively, these efforts would be defining and needs a supporting hand, needs supporting hands from all the stakeholders who could contribute and make their valuable interventions and contributions, and how we can support the government to make it happen. So under that, creating clean energy transition networks to have this nexus of energy and climate is necessary for both the climate change vulnerability aspects and also for poverty reduction and for sustainable economic growth in Pakistan. So under that, we have 3 subgroups as well that we would like to incorporate along with your ideas floating in today's meeting, that how we can enrich these groups and how we can ensure the participation of all the right stakeholders in these relevant groups to work collectively in efforts to make it happen. So Renewable Energy Working Group, working on the renewable energy side, the Corporate Sustainability Group, in the context of private sector and their corporate responsibility, and the Natural Capital Impact Network, in terms of working on how we can reduce and minimize the impacts on the environment and the socioeconomic part, and how we can develop these frameworks under these networks to complement it through financing and also in terms of policy making. So with this, I would like to keep this screen shared with all of you while I will move on to the panelists to have a discussion. So there are some icebreakers and there are debate questions as well that are mentioned on the screen. The icebreakers are mostly your opinion about the current state of energy sector and what are the current government strategies, what are the underlying reasons for increase of coal-fired power plants and the role of private sector, multilateral and bilateral organizations engagement. In terms of debate, probably we would like to hear more about how well equipped we are to make this transition. What are the long-term initiatives and action plans to ensure, and what could be? And would energy transition to clean energy sources and renewable energy would help the circular debt? Would it ensure reduction in electricity tariffs for us? And how will it help to overcome the overall economic burden of Pakistan? So this is more or less from my side. I'll keep this on for further discussion. And with this, I would like to give a floor to Dr. Fatima, if she has joined me from the private sector part, and if she could.
Yes, Hina, thank you so much. I have joined. And just to make sure that we both are on the same page, do you want me to talk on the icebreaker side, or do you want me to jump into the debate questions?
I think just for the icebreaker, do the ice breaking, you could just begin with the overall, just pick up some of the questions, especially the one related to the private sector, and then go on to the debate question directly. That's
great.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, a great presentation, and it looks like a lot of hard work has been put in there, especially considering the COVID environment. I guess hats off to you for putting up such a nice policy recommendations ahead, because this is something which is completely important, especially from the transition that we are going within the energy sector. So great work done there. Also, if you can share back the screen so I can just read the exact questions, although I do know what exactly.
Yeah, I will just share it in a minute, because we had some disruption and it will be allowed. Yeah, can you see it now?
Yes, I can. So I think quickly taking on to the very first thing where you're talking about the current state of energy sector in Pakistan. I think we are going through a major overhaul or a major transition stage when we talk about the energy sector. Why? Because at one point we are struggling with COVID, and on the simultaneously we are also struggling with our demand creation. I think that is something which is our key issue, and that is often missed when we are talking about various things within the energy landscape. What I feel is, irrespective of we talk about now or a decade old time or even prior to that, our entire focus within the energy sector has been on the generation side, and somehow we absolutely miss the other value chain that forms a very important part of the energy sector, which is our transmission and distribution. So whenever I think there is some debate or discussion on how to revamp the energy sector, the entire focus has always been on the generation, whether the only thing that is different is being the energy mix. So initially it was hydel. If you go back into 60s, we had more than 60% of our energy mix was hydel. Then we faced that time of severe shortage, which was in 2009 and 10, and then we moved on to the RFO, then we switched on to RLNG, and now we're talking about achieving 30% renewables by 2030. What I'm trying to make a point here is, I'm not saying that the energy mix, I'm not really criticizing the energy mix at this point. What I'm trying to focus on is that whatever has been in the energy sector, it has always been on the generation side, and that is why the other two value chain bits which are absolutely critical and important. They have been totally missed, which is our transmission and distribution. There still has been some work done on the transmission side, but our distribution has been the way it is for at least for ages. Currently, where we are sitting at is that we have a demand of around 7,000 to 9,000 for more than 6 or 7 months of the year, and then our peak demand is only for 3 months, which is our June, July, August, where it touches 26,000 megawatt. And for the rest of the year, we are struggling. We are hovering between 7,000 to 9,000 megawatts. Majority of our industrial estate are on their captive units, and if you talk about the grid, around over 51% is being the customer is being your domestic. Our tariffs have been rising. We are struggling with lowering that on one side. Then on the other side, we are still adding new plants to our generation mix, completely ignoring the fact that maybe our transmission is not in line with the generation that we are adding. So even if you have the generation, but you don't have the transmission to transfer that generation, so the only thing that you're adding is to the capacity burden. And you're not really doing any favor by even transitioning from a fossil fuel to a cleaner fuel, because the underlying things that you have to target, that's still not been addressed. Similarly, this on one side, on the other side, you might be aware that there have been negotiations underway on the IPP's existing contracts. So that's another thing which is currently happening. Then we are still into the single buyer model, which is the third dimension of this. Unless we move away from this single buyer model to a multi-buyer model, where either we transition through bilaterals and then through a proper CTBCM model, which NEPRA is all trying its best to roll it out by April 2022. I think all these things in place, one key factor which is going to pump the entire sector, not only the energy, but also because energy becomes the backbone of the industry and the economy as well, it's the demand creation. And demand creation is something which is directly linked to two things. One is your reliability, and second is your tariff. Unless these two things are being addressed, we cannot really move towards demand creation, and then transition towards a cleaner energy comes later on into that list. When we talk about the current government strategies, I think I've pretty much covered on that too. Yes, we have this target of moving to renewables by 2030. At the same time, government is trying to reduce the tariff by entering into these negotiations. They're also working towards the development of an independent market model, which is the CTBCM. The design phase have already been covered. I think now the different consultative sessions are underway. So that's what government is doing on that side. When we talk about the coal-fired power plants, I think what we fail to understand mostly as Pakistan is that for us, the stage where we are, our financial sustainability is much more than environmental sustainability. Having said that, the coal power plants in terms of price and also in terms of using the indigenous resource, I'm ignoring, I'm not talking about the imported coal for now, because I'm focusing on the third, which Hina, you've also emphasized in your presentation. I think that's a resource that we have, and that's not only going to provide us that base load that we need, but also at a cheaper rate, and also most importantly will bring in the energy security by having reliance on our own indigenous resource. And that's the reason why coal-fired power plants are relatively more focused on, and rightly so, I would say, because like I said, financial sustainability is utmost importance, because that is going to bring in the stability for our country and reduce our reliance on the imported fuel. When we talk about the role of the private sector, I think it's very important for one is to move away from this single buyer model to open up the market. And that's where the investment part comes in, and that's where the private sector kicks in, because they have that ability to actually give that opening to the market. For that, that's only possible if government is supportive in actually opening that bilateral market, which I must say on record that NEPRA is, and so are the other government quarters, whether it's the power ministry or it's the petroleum ministry. They're all working hand in hand and they're all working towards it. But because this is something which is new to us, I think it's going to take its own sweet time. However, in the interim, till our full-fledged competitive full-fledged CTBCM is rolled out, in the interim, we need to work towards the bilateral market, where we need to allow at least those power plants who are actually willing to explore the market and sell the electricity directly to the BPCs. I think they should be allowed via bilateral markets. This will not only reduce the exposure of the capacity payments, which IPPs are generally criticized for, but will also create that market where you will have more BPCs and more industrial growth, because when there will be cheaper electricity available, the industry would be interested in not only expanding but also setting up in Pakistan. And also because of that, they will actually come back to the grid, because when we talk about the bilateral markets, these IPPs which you would be the willing IPPs which are actually interested to move towards the bilateral market, they would be bringing in these industries who are currently relying on their captive by providing them that cheaper charge onto the grid, and this would also create a wheeling revenue for your distribution companies. So I think, having said that, the private sector is pretty much ready to play its part. It's just the little nuts and bolts that we need to fix within the policy side to give that opening to the private sector. And we have to take this first step, because eventually when we talk about moving towards the CTBCM, we need to take that first step right now via bilateral market. So we know what loopholes are we looking at and what we need to fix. So by the time the CTBCM is rolled out, the market is already ready to go into it. So that's my take on your icebreakers. And if you have anything you would like to, I hope I've not taken more than my time share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fatima, for the useful insights and knowledge and your interventions on the subject. With this, I'll quickly move on to Mr. Jahan Mirza, MD, PPID, for his interventions on this subject and how we can pave a way forward towards clean energy transition in Pakistan. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hina Aslam. I think this is, first of all, I must appreciate this is excellent initiative to go in this direction and do some real research work to reach some policy decision. I think if I look at your icebreaker, obviously the power sector and energy sector of Pakistan, to say the least, is not in the desirable shape. So we can talk very much about the energy and the power sector of Pakistan, and probably we can talk for hours and hours on this. But this type of initiative, I think probably this is the first initiative where any policy making or any reforms in the power sector are being recommended based on some research and some real data. So I think this would go in a big way to help the power sector to come out of its current difficulties and current problems. So as I said, we can talk very long, but since this is a limited time, so I will pick up a couple of points which I think are very relevant to today's discussion, as well as to the role of PPIB and to the power sector. Many areas have been covered by Fatima already very well, but I would like to pick up the first point, which I would like to pick up is that the why Pakistan is moving towards coal power generation. Some of the points which Fatima has raised, they are very valid. But I would like to deliberate a bit more on this because Pakistan, when we started coal initiative, the countries, which I always say actually, the countries which are working, striving very hard to reduce the coal generation, if we go few years back, the world average for coal generation was probably 60%, around 60%. And even today, if we look at many countries around us in the region, or maybe in some developed country as well, there's a big percentage of power generation on coal, because this has always remained a preferred fuel for the baseload power plants because of its cost and because of many other factors, its reliability and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, when the world was developing coal, Pakistan left behind. So when we started this initiative of coal generation in 2013-14 under the Cpec, Pakistan virtually have zero generation on coal. And in this situation where we have the 6th largest coal reservoir in Thar, which is obviously lignite coal, not a excellent quality coal, but but very good for the power generation purpose. So that was the first and the fundamental reason that when we look at the Pakistan scenario, and we thought that what should be the base load fuel for Pakistan. We were running out of gas. We did a lot of gas generation and we utilized gas in a lot of industries, even domestic use. But last 10 years, the last 15 years, what we are seeing, depleting reserve, no new discoveries, major new discoveries. And at the end, what we are seeing that we are heavily becoming dependent on the LNG imports. So that was the key factor looking at this fuel. And the second factor, as Fatima has already covered, that environmental is obviously important. We can't say, I would not like to say a word that environmental is not important. So the purpose of this point is not to de-emphasize the importance of environment, but the point is that the economic merit matters a lot. And what we have done in these cases, except initial few plants in the Thar, which are basically not supercritical technology, the remaining all plants are complying not only with the Pakistan NEQs and the environmental standards, but they are following and complying with the World Bank environmental standard. So on that side, Pakistan as a country has taken a lot of precaution that we should not get old and obsolete technologies, and we should start dumping here the junk power plants, which can create a lot of troubles for Pakistan. On the other side, if we look at environmental and social development due to Thar coal, I think that's probably about 10, 15, 20 years back. This was a dream basically, that such kind of facilities can be provided to the people living in the Thar. So that what I see CMC has done, what Engro has done, I think that's a basically role model for other projects to follow. Although obviously it's with the limited people and limited population, but as we expand Thar, that we will go forward. So government has taken, I would say, a very big initiative, a challenging initiative of bringing renewable energy from 25 to 30%. But at the same time, what we see, and I think most of us know, that our grid system is basically very old, and it has not been revamped, and it has not been upgraded technologically where it can absorb the renewable in the big way because of its variability and intermittency. Work has started on that, but we need to have base load. I think for the next 10, 15 years, we need to look at our base load fuel. There are two options for the base load. One is the gas, which, as I said earlier, we don't have gas. So probably the best option from economic side, from merits, is the local coal, the foreign exchange saving, and there are many benefits with that. But again, the caution is that we have to be very, very cautious that we must comply with the world environmental standard, and we should not basically compromise on that. So that is what we're doing. So I stop here on the coal power generation side. Grid enforcement in itself is a big challenge for Pakistan, and I think government has started working on that, but it will still take some time. There are 2 studies which have been carried out and which are close to finalization with the support of World Bank. One is the variable VRE study, variable renewable energy integration study in the grid, and the other one is the locational study for the RE. So RE is being taken as a big and probably flagship initiative in the energy sector by the current government. But again, we need to have some support from the fossil fuels. The government has already decided, I think, that unless there is real baseload requirement, there will be no coal power projects. So practically, as PPIB, we have not issued any new approval for the last, I would say, since 2016. We have not issued any new approval for the coal-based power project or for the other thermal projects, except the 4 RLNG power plants, which was the government decision to implement because of it's relatively quite clean compared to the coal power plant. So in terms of how well Pakistan is equipped in terms of energy transition in Pakistan, what are the long-term initiative and action. I think we have already covered that, but I think the area we need to further focus is the distribution side, where our situation is very bad. And as we increase the renewable energy more and more, the intermittency increases. And there are many, I will not get into the technicalities, the SCADA system need to be installed, the grid need to be revamped. So these are basically main area where we need to work if we really want to do increase the renewable share to 30%. With this, I think from the private sector perspective, Fatima has covered very well, but I think we need to streamline the procedure further. Though Alhamdulillah, I say with pride that PPIB has been quite successful in providing one window facility and bringing in 17,000 plus megawatt in the national grid. But still, I think we need to streamline our processes, and the government initiative of ease of doing business, which is in my personal feeling is moving a bit slow. We need to expedite this on the energy sector, and we need to facilitate the private sector in terms of bringing in new investment and looking into the roadmap. I think Dr. Hina presentation included one very, very important point, that is the integrated energy plan and the generation expansion plan, least cost generation expansion plan. I think these are the two fundamental documents which can set the direction of the energy and power sector right for the next medium to long term. Otherwise, what we have been doing in the past, that is what we are basically moving with the reactionary mode. Whenever the problems start occurring, it becomes severe and severe. Then we start getting into the procurement, and whatever best. At that time, our criteria is not the optimum price. Our criteria is not the optimum solution for environment. Our sole criteria remains that which project, which technology can come the quickest, the earliest. So with this, these two plans, I hope that once these are in place, we'll not get into these cycles of shortages and then surpluses. So with this, I end. If in the end, maybe I may be available for the question answer, and then I will make more contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shah Jahan, for these valuable insights and contribution on the subject. And moving on, I'll quickly give a floor to Ms. Hadika Jamshed, who is a climate change specialist supporting Ministry of Climate Change, an expert on carbon credits, NDCs, and also looking into these aspects of localizing carbon market tools for sustainable development, and let's say air pollution and other environmental issues control in Pakistan. So over to you, Hadika.
Thank you, Hina. Thank you for the introduction. And hello, everyone. So I will just start, and firstly, I will congratulate SDPI on this venture. So greening Cpec seems like a great way of mobilizing finance towards renewable energy development in Pakistan, and also to meet the goals of climate change. And these sectors, which currently faces a lot of institutional and empirical hurdles, so it's a right step towards the right direction, I would say. So thank you for that. And my intervention will be mostly from the lens of climate change, and I will be leaving the energy-related technical things to the expert, all the experts available today for this session. And so yeah, from the point of view of climate change, under Paris Agreement, Pakistan submitted its nationally determined contributions back in 2016. And according to that document, we aim to reduce 20% of the emissions by 2030. Keeping in mind that we get a financial fundings, international fundings of 40 billion for mitigation and 7 to 14 billion for adaptation. So in that document, we used a baseline of 2015 GHG emissions, and according to that, 46% of emission is coming from the energy sector, which is the major contributor, and it is expected to increase to 56% by 2030 under business as usual scenario. This shows that the most significant interventions is needed in the energy sector if we want to meet the goals of climate change and reduce the emissions of Pakistan in future. Right now, we are at the we are revising the NDCs, and we plan to submit in few months. It's a 5-year it's a cycle. After every 5 years, you have to submit a revised NDCs. And in this process, we have 2 technical working groups, one on mitigation and another one is on adaptation. So coming to the mitigation working group, we are exploring the ARE policy, and because this technical working group is chaired by NICA, and they are also exploring the NICA strategical plan of 2023. So these 2 plans are being evaluated, and we are evaluating that how these 2 policies will help meet the goals, climate change goals of Pakistan. And just from the very basic analysis we have done, only for NICA strategical plan, it shows that almost 2 to 3% of the emission reduction of the 20% emission reduction goal we have for Pakistan will be met by this strategical plan. So I'm pretty sure that the ARE policy will be contributing more than that, for sure, because till 2025, it is stated that 20% of the fuel will be from renewables. So these policies are actually, like, if you look at the Paris Agreement and the recent ARE policies and all, these ambitions and targeted emissions can never be achieved without a contribution from the power sector. And within this sector, we need a shift away from the fossil fuel intensive energy resources and a transition of a cleaner fuel mix. Even with the EV policy, we plan to start a transition to electric vehicles, and not just for the electricity, but additionally, they will have a huge economic benefit, as the policy is pillared on Make in Pakistan, foreseeing the development of local manufacturers and job opportunities. And as Abid mentioned in his opening remarks as well, that the Prime Minister of Pakistan made a speech in the Climate Ambition Summit recently, and he announced a shift away from the coal-fired generations. In addition to the suspension was also imposed on 2 coal-fired power plants fueled by imported coal earlier, which resulted in closing of 2 coal power plants. So there may have been other factors influencing these decisions, such as generation capacity surplus, but it's a right step in the right direction, as said before as well, that something is happening, and it actually gave a very good image of Pakistan internationally as well. Just closing my remarks, and what really going to make the clock ticking in supporting these policies with the comprehensive roadmaps for ongoing actions. And this is where creating financing opportunities for the renewable energy through Cpec, or the role of availability of off-grid solutions such as distributed generation can come in and play a significant role. And at the end, I would just like to emphasize the involvement of youth as a stakeholder and major participant in this energy transition, as they are the asset of the country, and they have a greater role for the said accomplishments. And they can play a very significant role through their research and innovation ideas. So yeah, thank you. I will be closing this.
Thank you so much, Hadika, for touching upon our climate commitments and how this could lead us to the long-term actions and plans for the transition in Pakistan and ensuring the economic growth. Moving on, I'd like to invite Dr. Christoph from Beijing. And Dr. Christoph would be talking in terms of, as mentioned by our previous panelist, Hadika, on greening Cpec, and probably what would be the role of Chinese financial institutions, or the broader perspective of greening BRI agenda of China now, and how do you see Pakistan moving forward with it? Your interventions would be really helpful for this. So over to you, Dr. Christoph.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, yes.
Can you hear me? Great, wonderful. Well, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here, and congratulations for setting up the network, and also congratulations to your president and kind of to the whole country for the ambitious targets of actually moving out of fossil fuels, or at least of coal, and also, of course, the 60% renewable energy target. So that's really, really fantastic. It's a great opportunity for renewable energy, I think, as we all just heard, and also kind of to add some spice to that and optimism. I think the time has never been better to move to renewable energy. There's a decreasing cost, of course, as we know. There's strong global political will, which is also accelerating. And there's also, of course, ever more technological possibilities for energy storage. I think that's a huge opportunity, which also one of the previous speakers, I think it was Mrs. Khushnud, mentioned so emphatically, that it's not only about generation, but also about distribution and storage. So further investing in fossil fuels is just not cheap. It's more expensive. It has direct cost that tend to be higher than renewable energy, but also, of course, the indirect cost through transition risks and increasing physical risk from accelerated climate change. So I think there's kind of such a strong momentum towards renewable energies, and we have to make it possible. It's not easy. So in our research at the Green BRI Center here in Beijing, we are very similar in some ways to SDPI. We inform policymakers, investors, and developers in China and internationally through evidence-based research and advice. Of course, our mission is to green the BRI, and that includes Pakistan as one of the most important countries of the BRI. And what that means is not only to accelerate green, but also decelerate, to reduce brown investments. And I think that's really, really important. We often talk about there's not enough money to do green investments. I would say there's too much money doing brown investments. So we really have to kind of find the levers to shift from brown to green. And adding to the good news, kind of to stay positive, particularly for Pakistan, I just looked up some of the numbers. Reducing coal dependency would free up massive resources. I'm sure you're all aware, coal imports to Pakistan increased 6 times between 2013 and 2020. So 6 times between 2013 to 2020, from less than 3 billion tons to about 18 billion tons now. It constitutes about 2.75% of total imports into Pakistan. That is about $1.4 billion every year. Now, kind of, if you look at average prices of solar installations, this $1.4 billion that is imported into coal now and is equivalent to the installation cost of about 1.4 gigawatts of solar power. So kind of really, it's of course we have to do levelized cost of energy. I'm fully aware of that, but I think kind of sometimes we also have to put into kind of our mind how much coal we actually import and how much also that increases our dependency on other countries. And of course, there's the tar coal field, but again, I think let's move out of coal. What we do as well, we of course look at challenges for investors, not only Chinese, we also work a lot with international partners, particularly for third-party cooperation, and so forth, between China and a third country investing in BRI countries. And what we're seeing, and I think that's some of the struggles that Pakistan is potentially facing, but I know that many other countries are facing it, and is of course, COVID has dried up financial resources. For a number of reasons, of course, decreasing tax revenues, decreasing exports, particularly of commodities with falling commodity prices, with the same requirement for increased stimulus. So financial resources are not as abundant as they used to be. We also saw, of course, this massive drop of Chinese overseas investments, which we're tracking very closely, both in terms of investments and in lending over the last 2 years, actually already, which of course we're expecting to accelerate with the newest data for 2020. I think there are other challenges that were also mentioned, the generation transition. This is not only a Pakistani challenge. We know from our research that this is a challenge anywhere that kind of wants to invest in renewable energy. The focus was on generation and too little on transmission. What we're also seeing, particularly from Chinese investors, is that there's a risk that they're worried about the financial security and kind of their investments. So how can we securitize the investments through sovereign guarantees? or actually, again, through third party and third country cooperation, is a huge difficulty. Also because we are seeing different standards of environmental impact assessment requirements, and we're seeing different standards on social requirements. So there are challenges for co-investing that need to be overcome. We also see, of course, the huge land needs for renewable energies, whether it's hydropower and solar, partly also wind, but that, I think there we have some more flexibility. And that often tends to be forgotten when we try to invest in renewables, which also gives a huge headache to foreign investors often, because how do you deal with the transition of land use rights? And then, of course, always the question, and I think sometimes also excuse of the base load. It's a real technical issue. I'm an engineer by background, so I kind of understand it. But I also know, and we also know, of course, that a number of countries have more and more achieved a higher and higher percentage of renewable energy access. And it's very good to see also for Pakistan that, of course, hydropower does play a role, and hydropower in some ways can provide, of course, a massive amount of baseload, which is then not required through coal. And so there are, of course, kind of to that point, there are solutions. There are solutions in order to accelerate investments into renewable, which we need. Green finance is, of course, the buzzword, but what does it actually mean, green finance? How can we ensure that we are investing in green and not in brown? So there are, of course, the possibility to provide guarantees, the diversification of financing resources, and of course the awareness raising in financial institutions and capacity building in financial institutions to not only say we want to do green, but to also understand the de facto financial risks of not moving into green. So that's I think some of the things that we're working on, and also working on with the Chinese side. And so kind of coming to the core of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Cpec, and again, Pakistan and China have such a strong relationship. Pakistan is by far the largest recipient of energy investments of all BRI countries. The second largest would be the United Arab Emirates, which receives about half as much investments in energy as Pakistan. So Pakistan, about 20 billion investments, UAE about but that's, yeah, about half as much. And so there is, of course, also within the BRI context and the Cpec context, a huge drive and a huge willingness or huge interest to drive greening. And it's also good to see that SDPI is one important member of the BRI Green Coalition, which is under the Chinese Ministry of Ecology and Environment, an initiative that was set up in 2019 to green the Belt and Road Initiative. And one of the big outcomes that was published this year of kind of this BRI Green Coalition was the Green Development Guidance, which we at IIGF were the lead authors of, but was of course backed and supported by all of the relevant ministries in China. It was published on December 1st. And kind of what that really shows is kind of this increasing awareness also of China to go out and provide more financing for green investments. And what this Green Development Guidance kind of really for the first time did very, very clearly is to say coal investments are red, and red ideally becomes less and less investments. Red becomes more expensive to invest in. Red becomes more difficult to invest in because, for example, the approval processes for overseas financing become slower for red projects. Contrast that to green projects, which are of course solar and wind projects that ideally should be accelerated. And of course, then Chinese investors can play a huge role, and Chinese technology providers can play a huge role as some of the leading technology providers. So there's a massive interest, of course, to work with Pakistan as one of the largest and most important countries of the BRI and of the partnerships with China. and of course also using kind of the momentum that Pakistan is creating to green itself and kind of to green investments for the rest of the BRI as a role model. And again, with that, I congratulate Pakistan and the SDPI for really greening itself, greening Cpec, and hopefully also greening overall Chinese investments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christoph, for this great contribution and enthusiasm, and very encouraging to see this coming from the Chinese side as well, of their motivation to shift towards green investments and not to more focus on the brown and the red. So the document is really interesting, and I think it's very useful contribution coming from the ministry and the institution that you reside on. So moving on, I'll quickly go on to our next panelist, who is Mushtaq Gaadi Saab, who is a consultant of European Climate Foundation, for his interventions on this topic and to shed light on. Can you hear us, Mushtaq?
Yes, thanks, Hina, for arranging this very important discussion. I am also thankful for giving me an opportunity to speak on this subject. I will be very brief and talk about a couple of things. First is about approach that is a very old approach based on some binary opposition between financial and environmental sustainability, in which many times financial sustainability has been put against environmental sustainability. But I think that given the advancement in sciences, technology, and the and other available resources, now the integrated approach is possible. Both financial and environmental sustainability is can be accomplished. So this approach that sustainability, whether financial sustainability should be preferred or environmental sustainability should be preferred, that I think should be somehow questioned or thought about. Second, my second point is about PM announcement that no coal power based project will be undertaken in Pakistan. That should be welcomed. That is the right decision, right announcement. But I think that we do also need to figure it out, that what does it mean in terms of integrated indicative generation capacity expansion plan, IGCF, because IGCF it proposes to increase the share of coal after 2030. So if we think that this announcement has serious policy consequences, that then IGCF needs to be reviewed, it needs to be revised. And also here I would also like to mention the World Bank study on renewable energy in Pakistan that questions the financial costs of thermal power projects. It encourages the government that it should reconsider its approach to develop thermal resources. Thermal resources, yes, they are indigenous resources, but similar is the case with wind and solar energy. They are also indigenous resources. So indigenization, so when we prefer renewable energy, that doesn't mean that indigenization policy is left out. Both are indigenous resources. So the question is, what is financially cheap, environmentally sustainable, and in this case, I think renewable energy has great potential. Charcoal water resources, there are a number of environmental issues, but here I would like to highlight the water crisis in Thar region. All of the underground water resources, they will be depleted at very at substantial quantity. It would disturb the recycling of underground water resources, and at the same time it would also require fresh water resources, which are very precious so far as Pakistan is concerned, especially in the downstream region in Sindh, lower riparian region. And that point has also been raised up by NEPRA in its comments on IGCF. So we should take water resources as a serious resource, and we cannot play it up for the sake of present energy requirements, because water stress is also very serious stress, and it would also affect the future of communities, people. And the third point that I would like to raise is the issue of overcapacity. I think that IGCF, its estimates for growth, they are somehow over ambitious, and based on those economic growth estimates, the energy estimates, energy demand estimates, they are also somehow wrong. And that is why we are, at the present, we are also facing this overcapacity issue in the form of paying capacity charges. And I think if we don't revise IGCEP, then we will be encountered with overcapacity issue in the future, and that will also be a kind of a threat for the financial sustainability of energy sector in Pakistan. Thanks. These were just few comments I wanted to make. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Mushtaq, for highlighting some of the gaps and the shortcomings that we have in the IGCEP plan of Pakistan, and also some of the things that we should really consider while addressing the challenges to be overcome in the years to come. And also highlighting the water-related issues, that is also a very important outcome of the research we did on the charcoal field, that highlights this aspect and prioritize the necessity to have real-time consideration for these impacts on the water resources. So thank you so much. Moving on, we would have Dr. Najeeb from University of Peshawar. Thank you so much, sir. The floor is yours.
So as far as academia is concerned, I think we need a paradigm shift. And we believe in the fact that business as usual will never work. In fact, in 2014, this center, which is called US-Pakistan Center for Advanced Studies in Energy, was established. And this was basically a joint venture with one of the American university, Arizona State University, and of course, Oregon State University as well. So I would like to touch upon all of the three components. And first thing is that, are we equipped? Academically, I can say I'm afraid there is a huge gap between the supply and demand. And there are four components which I would like to share. The first thing is that there is a huge flux of the renewable energy technologies in case of solar, in case of wind, in case of hydro. But unfortunately, we don't have any testing and certification labs. So it's difficult to find what should be the technology and how to control the junk products. And the problem is, if we don't stop all these junk products, then there are so many failure cases. And one of the failure cases can unfortunately shift the entire scenario. So the first thing is that I think what we need academically in some of the universities, our universities should be linked with some institution where there should be testing and certification facilities. The second part is that we will need a trained human resource. In all of the existing infrastructure, we are producing engineers, it might be electrical, But I think it's a time to start energy specialized engineers in case of renewable, in case of solar again, in case of hydro. So I'm afraid we are not ready to cope with this huge change of 30% in 2030. So we should immediately start to commence some of the new academic programs. Now the third one is that as mentioned, and I think in academia, the hardcore things that is too much technical, these are the focus. But at the certain stages, we need some policy engineers as well, or policy experts as well. And by policy experts, I mean that we should produce some engineers or policy experts who can understand the legal experts, who can understand like the power tariff calculation, power purchase agreements. So we should definitely come toward this side as well. We at our center has started Energy Management and Sustainability Master Program. But again, the problem is that these master programs are very focused on academic. We should shift towards case studies where we can work with the policy institution like SDPI, where we can work in the field and we can show some of the real case studies. The third and the very important one. As far as these all technologies are coming, I always say that this is like the end, we are the end user. There should be a technology transfer. Unless and until we go for indigenization, as it is the case now, there are so many unemployed engineers because we don't have the high-tech industry. We don't have the high-tech manufacturing things. So along with all this shift, there should be the indigenization as well. And by indigenization, I definitely say that there should be venture capitalism and there should be technology transfer policy, that if the university want to bring in some of the technology transfer, they should be facilitated. Of course, in the world of knowledge-based economy, the Pakistani universities should produce this one, but unfortunately, we are not that equipped. So the best thing can be and should be that if there can be a linkages with the best enterprises in the world, like Cambridge Enterprise or Oxford Enterprise, so that can be the best start or the viable solution. So that was my discussion regarding how equipped we are. Unfortunately, so far there is a gap, and I think this should be fulfilled in a very shorter time. The next one is, can the renewable energy decrease the circular debt? Yeah, we have worked on this one and we strongly recommend that there should be decentralized system now. By decentralization, what we can do, we can definitely decrease the line losses, the technical and the non-technical one. And rather than this one, we have strongly recommended, and Punjab has already started. We are doing the same thing in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. We are solarizing all public universities and hospitals. So that will definitely enhance that will definitely decrease the transmission and distribution losses, and that will definitely decrease the cost as well. The next point is that, as mentioned, that we in Pakistan, unfortunately, we don't have the high-tech manufacturing units. So it should be supported by the government, that rather than only bringing the final products, Pakistan should focus on bringing these technologies and to produce it locally. There should be some facilitation. Otherwise, there will be unemployment, and otherwise, in the longer run, we will be unable even to sustain it in the longer term. These were my some recommendations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Najeeb, for highlighting these gaps and how important is it for the academia and the research to be integrated into the effective planning of the sector. With this, probably all of you would be able to see the poll that we have just released on the screen, and you would be able to see to answer your very general question on how satisfied are you with the Pakistan's development in the energy sector. So that's it from moving on. I would like to call upon Mr. Jawad Rizvi from Lahore Chambers of Commerce on his insights and his opinions on this subject, and how do you think that the academia, or how do you think that the media or the other medium can, the role they can play in this clean energy transition in Pakistan, and how would you see a long-term benefits coming out of it in terms of reducing the economic burden, circular debt, like mentioned in one of the debate questions at the end. So we would like to give you floor to shed light on these, please. Mr. Jawad, over to you.
Thank you, Hina. First, I want to clear that I am a senior journalist. I am a senior economic journalist in the news. I'm not representing our Chamber of Commerce industry. It mistakenly communicated if someone's told you.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. It's just...
No, it's no issue.
Yeah. Please continue.
Let me start with the thing that all the experts talk about the coal, solar, and the renewables, but the issue lies with the inconsistency of the policies and sudden jumps to the policies. For example, it's heavily criticized in the world that world need to move from coal to the other cheap resources or renewable environment friendly resources. But when we see the growth of the countries, economic growth of the countries, it's like India, it's like China, it's like US. Every country in the world becomes economically sound with the base of the coal energy. But when we talk about in Pakistan, coal energy is highly politicized. In Pakistan, every project is highly politicized, which create hurdles for the progress and the economic prosperity. Economic prosperity and climate change is correlated now because globally it's a mega challenge, and we have seen the issue of the smoke in Lahore, and it's not a one-day game. Still, the government is doing a lot of work on controlling the environmental issues. For example, Dr. Najeeb mentioned, and I have reported this as well, the government of Punjab is converting its buildings to greener buildings and shifting towards the solar energy. But the question arises, would it be able to convert the existing building into greener energy? Yes, it could, but it's heavily costed. But we have to pay the cost for the clean environment. Pakistan Climate Index, which is reported by the World Bank recently in an annual report, that Pakistan plays in the 5th on the climate index. This shows that Pakistan needs to reduce the usage of the fossil fuels, but need to move from the environment friendly renewable energies. But how? The question still exists, how? For example, if we see in the previous government, they have focused towards the coal energy for the cheap energy. But now we have seen our Prime Minister's statement that we wouldn't have any coal project in future. What will be the future of the existing coal projects, and what will be the future of the existing policy which was established by the previous government, taking the stakeholders on board and evolving towards a cheaper energy for the industry and the domestic use. Now, the inconsistent policy and unfavorable policy is also hurting the whole energy sector. This energy sector is indebted with the secular debt, and there is no clear pathway where to move forward. There is need to remove the roadblocks in the way of wider use of clean energy, being only the most efficient, feasible, and reliable, safest medium of energy generation. But still, we contribute to reducing reliance on the imported fuel and harnessing the immense indigenous renewable energy sources Pakistan will in Pakistan. For example, we're still relying on the RLNG and imported fuels to fuel our economy, but it's costing high. But there's still no proper policies developed for the solar energy generation. We need to focus on the solar and cheap solar, and let us develop technologies of solar energy. Still, we have imported the solar energy which is being outdated and it is costing high to the public. For example, just give you the example which I get to know from the industry. There is no policy of wheeling the energy if you are generating from solar. For instance, if an industry has installed some capacity of some a megawatt of the solar energy on his plant, and he used half of the energy, but he could not wheel it to and sold it to the his neighboring immediate industry or a commercial production unit. This need to be addressed. For example, if one is investing and he can sold that extra energy to his neighbor without any problem, without any involvement of the government. They need to just do agreement between the two produce buyer and seller, and they wheel the energy to the neighbor, or even it wheel the energy to the some distance to the say 1 kilometer to another another industry. This what we need to address. Then if we see there is a huge consumption of the energy on the domestic side on the big houses, we need to change the laws and bring the amendments that if we are constructing a one canal house anywhere in Pakistan, the house owner must install this on solar energy. It will further reduce the burden on the fossil fuel consumption, and it will also create cushion for the government for they provide ensure the energy to the industry. Then we have see there is an issue on the government claims and contradictory targets. On ground steps, there is no concrete steps are taken by the government or the alternate renewable energy due to which this problem is rising. For instance, the coal power plant installed in Cyber Hub and the two being installed in Tharpak and Gwadar were a direct contradiction to the mentioned policy, which is floated in 2019 on alternate energy, renewable energy. An argument is made frequently that Pakistan has a huge reservoir of coal and it's disposable. Why it should not be utilizing its generated energy? Still, we have seen the sorry. Still, we have seen the Cyber coal power. It's based on the imported coal. Our cement sector is importing the coal for the fueling their industry. Where are we heading? Don't we have the sufficient coal to use for domestic use, or we still based on the imported energy? If we see this, the imported coal and RLNG, it's still at par with the IPP cost. And when we put it in the IPP cost, this again add to the circular debts, which is still there is no clue for the government how to resolve this issue of the circular debt. So again, whole thing is politicized, and the current government says this is the problem of the previous government. Previous government says it's the issue of the PPP when it introduced the IPPs and make the agreement for the long-term agreement with the high cost. So it's remained politicized, and both industry and public is suffering alongside the climate. So when we talk about the issues, we need to give a clear policies, but still we see there's a lack in the policies, there's drawbacks in the policies which is given by the NTDC, naming Inductive Generation Capacity Expansion Plan 2047. Just imagine in 2020, we planned for next 30 years, but that policy is still having problems with the focus on towards the newly development energy sources. For example, focus on the costly energy based on coal or energy was given in the IGC 2047, ignoring the technology which is dominant beyond the 2030. The plan includes addition of renewable to meet the targets of the alternative energy policy 2030, but neglects renewable resources in the overall energy mix beyond that. The overall contribution of renewable energy to the country's power capacity drops from the 31% in 2030 to 23% in 2047. Just imagine the policy is telling the overall contribution will reduce almost 8% in 2030 to 2047. So, if the policymakers are going and making such policies, where we are heading towards? We need to utilize the indigenous resources of coal, solar, and wind. But still, when we talk about the wind, it's still a highly sensitive topic, and we even can't touch to the areas which are the long solar wind corridors in the Punjab, lying starting from the Kalakar to the whole belt, but it is in the use of the defense purposes. We can't install the windmills here. I just share your example and experience. Almost 12 years back, a Chinese firm installed a small pilot project in the Kalakar area. If we travel on the motorway, we see some 3, 4, or 5 windmills standing there. And still, after installing that project, they still could not be able to expand and increase the productivity from that area. Question, it could be answered by the policymaker, thinkers, and the government. Why we are not unleashing the potential? We still sorry, we still use only some areas in the Sindh for the wind power, which is wind corridors, but we still are unable to use the area of the wind power lies in the Punjab in some areas of the DG Khan and South due to security reasons which need to be addressed. But the most important thing, we urgently need to expand the energy on the solar and wind, at least 30%. And when we say the 30%, it's almost equivalent to 24,000 megawatts. And 24,000 megawatt is not a one-day game. If we see, we still have the only around for the wind, we are generating almost 1,500 megawatts, which is almost 4% of our total capacity. And for the solar, we are on the less than 0.07% of our total energy productions. So how we will achieve this? This is the actually way forward. But the countries, the investors who want to invest in the projects, they are uncertain about their future. For instance, we have almost 40 days crushing season of the sugar cane in Pakistan, and we still unable to synthesize, bring them on board to generate energy from the bagasse, which is also indigenous, and we save the energy. We can produce the cheap energy, but only couple of the mills are producing energy from the bagasse, and they are not complete potential of them is underutilized. What is the reason? The only reason, there is issue between the industry and the government. They want some tariff, but government refused to give some tariff. 10 years back, when the previous people and government come in the Punjab, they work very hard on the utilizing this potential, which is almost more than 6,000 megawatts of the whole sugarcane industry of Punjab, Pakistan. But still, if we see the small plants, 2 or 3 firms is producing some minimum negligible production of the energy from their plants. So this is what we need, that once we are making the policies, we should consider what is developing in the countries. If we are the issue of the criticizing the coal is very correct. If we see towards the installation of the obsolete technology in the coal generation, then it will definitely create the problems for the environment. If we install the latest modern technology for coal power generation, which is installed in China, it is good for the country to produce coal from the latest technology. But unfortunately, our policymakers and thinkers, ignore this area. The reason the decision maker in the government sector, which are in the hand of the bureaucrats, even didn't know what is actual policy and what it should be. For example, I give you the example, one bureaucrat, senior bureaucrat, headed the Kaidam solar power park in Pakistan, Punjab, and established the Bahawalpur Solar Park. Before that, he went on scholarship to US for 6 months, and he studied the energy sector, and then he returned, and then he served there for the almost 2.5 years. And after then, he was moved to next position and then the next position. In a meeting, I asked him, sir, why you are eyeing towards move some commissioner position, or you want to become the secretary of some other administrative department? Why not you ask or request the government to appoint you in the energy sector, because you have established a plant there and you also have the experience now, and you have also studied somehow 6 months crash course from the US, from UK, or from recognized leading university. Why you are not doing this? He simply says, that's not my forte. I am just for the administrative process. I have done my service here, and I will move forward. So this is how the policy thinkers and makers are decide that their own careers, not the government, not the public interest, and not the country's interest. If a Secretary Power and Water and Power is appointed for 3 months or 6 months, he could not be even able to understand what is the power sector is and how he will.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Fatima. Can we kind of wind up? We are running short of time, and we have some questions.
Yes, I'm just ending up.
Yes, thank you so much.
So this is the actual situation which we need to be addressed on war footing basis to give trust to the public, give trust to the investors, and create stability in the power sector for the long-term policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jawad sir, for highlighting these issues of our huge political economy, and definitely needs better institutional strengthening and coordination, and overcoming these challenges is the need for today. Moving on, we were very happy to have some questions. Due to some interruption from some outsiders, we had to close the chat, but we do have some questions coming in through in our email. One of them says that if we have a debate on clean energy, and we do see that it has a huge political economy factor, is this also linked with end of many IPP contracts? Can we expect better tariff as a result of reverse bidding in a case of wind and solar? Probably Mr. Shah, Jahan, Mirza would be able to shed light on these.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very pertinent and probably very difficult question at this stage. While the government is working to maybe revise some of the power purchase agreement and reduce the tariffs, but I think in the longer term, government might have to review that whether these agreements should be basically terminated, or maybe some arrangement could be made. But currently, what we are looking for, that once this CTBCM model, the competitive trading market model, comes into effect, basically we'll try that these IPPs should be competing in the market rather than getting a sort of fixed dispatch orders. But I think this is a relatively difficult question, because we have valid contract under, some of them are under Pakistani law, some of them are under international law. So if at some stage we feel that the need is to basically close down these IPPs, the government, in my expectation, government have to sit down with those IPPs and find a win-win solution and the way out. Maybe they can afford to do, instead of running these thermal plants, they could be offered to do the renewable energy power plants or something. But in my assessment, probably we don't have a definitive answer at this stage.
Thank you, Shah Jahan Saab. We have another question from one of our attendees. Is about esteemed panelists today, could reflect upon the demand side management, energy efficiency and conservation, how this could play an effective role in terms of overcoming the energy crisis. Secondly, how an integrated policy framework coupled with financial instruments could effectively promote drives in the industrial sector of Pakistan. So I think anyone who would like to, I see a raised hand, but I think it's from if you could request is Dr. Fatima or Dr.
Yeah,
Najeeb?
I can answer this question, but just can you repeat the first question? I missed a part of it.
Yeah, it's about reflecting upon the demand side management, energy efficiency and conservation, and how this could play an effective role in terms of overcoming the energy crisis.
We see, I think, in the press and in the other media that the NECA, which is National Energy Conservation Authority, they are doing they have started doing efforts actually to develop plan and implement on the energy conservation, which is, I think, a very important step in terms of energy efficiency for the country. But I think whenever we look at some problem or some issue, currently, in my understanding, the saving of energy is not that critical. I mean, it is critical from the perspective of efficiency, but that's not a real problem because we, as one of the speakers already said, we are running to some extent in the surplus scenario. So what government is now doing, and I think what should be done, that is the creating more demand, which obviously could be done through some incentives to the industry, to the businesses and all those, so that industrial growth picks up. And with that, GDP growth picks up and the power demand picks up. So energy conservation is an important thing. Government is working on it, but that's not, I would say that's not a critical problem at this stage if we look at specifically with the reference to power generation. But overall, in terms of economic saving to the economy on the imports of fuel and all those things, I think that's very important. And government realizing that has already started initiatives.
Let me add, we were discussing, and according to PICA, they have done energy conservation and efficiency measurements, and they used, they have the system actually, they can standardize things, all of the appliances. And according to their data, one of the hospital was completely converted based on the energy conservation and efficiencies, and they've saved 45% in the last year.
Yeah, thank you so much.
In that sense, sorry, a small addition. In that sense, NECA has also started energy audit of the captive power plant, which are inefficient and consume a lot of gas. Similarly, they are carrying out some energy audits of the large industries also. So that initiative is also being done on the federal level.
Yeah, this all sounds really great initiatives in terms of energy conservation in Pakistan, and we look forward to hear more. Thank you so much to all the experts who have joined us today, and we are very fortunate to have insights from nearly all of the stakeholders and the important experts that could guide us and equip us with the useful knowledge that will be part of our evidence, research-based evidence that we have produced. As well as moving on, we will be continuing to have these additions into those drafts for dissemination purpose in the completion phase. Also, to the audience and the attendees, we won't be able to take more questions, but since we are talking about a network and we will be in touch, so we would be very happy and pleased to have encourage questions coming from your side, and we'll be answering those at any time. With this, I would like to give an opportunity and a floor to our Joint Executive Director, Dr. Waqar Ahmed, to wrap up the discussion and to shed light on today's discussion that has been really valuable in my opinion, and also how SDPI could lead the way forward. So over to you, Dr. Waqar.
Thank you, Dr. Hina, and thank you, Ahad and the team for organizing this. I think this has been a very insightful discussion. Must thank all the esteemed panelists over here. I think the sustainable development from an energy lens would require a timely implementation of the renewable energy policy framework, as all the panelists emphasized. And I believe two ingredients are important for the success of this framework. We learned today that ensuring the use of evidence at various stages of policy implementation would be important. And second, ensuring public-private dialogue with the aim to keep the implementation process inclusive will be important. In both these ingredients, the role of think tanks and networks such as the one which we are convening today is important, with the objective to produce timely research, capacity building, and of course, policy engagement. A focus on clean and energy systems becomes even more important as we talk about building back better in a post-pandemic environment. We are mindful that federal and provincial government will have to do much more to put SDG 7 back on track during the post-pandemic recovery. And in this regard, of course, more innovative policy and regulatory reform could expedite our transitioning towards cleaner technologies. The purpose of such research networks, as informed by Dr. Hina, should be to produce inclusive knowledge products going forward, and then to form a coalition of advocacy and outreach which can take forward and follow up on the policy recommendations as well. Very grateful to Dr. Fatima Khushnud for making a very strong case to diversify our focus in favor of transmission and distribution side, and need to move away from the single buyer model as early as possible. But then, of course, also to put in place a level playing field for investors to come in and compete. And here, not just the role of NEPRA, but Competition Commission of Pakistan, their role also becomes very important here. The modeling exercises which advocate for clean and green have to show the productivity gains of this transitioning to the economy, import savings, apart from the health and environmental advantages, of course. Also grateful to Mr. Shah Jahan Mirza. I think he rightly advocated for ease of doing business in the energy sector, apart from his other interventions. And we sincerely hope that the Board of Investment, they are spearheading Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative, PRMI. And PRMI, we sincerely hope, would lessen the regulatory burden for all in the energy supply chain in the coming days. And the intent is there, as Syeda, Hadika, and Dr. Abid Suleri informed about how Prime Minister continues to be a force behind the clean and green energy, which is, of course, encouraging our narrative with the development partners as well, as Christoph also added to this. Mushtaq, Gaadi Saab informed how development in projects such as Thar should not disturb Pakistan's water sector sustainability. Very timely argument, of course. Dr. Najeeb informed about academia's point of view on this subject and the need for more testing labs to screen out hazardous technologies and products. And of course, very insightful discussion led by Mr. Javad Rizvi, who advocated that government needs to move fast towards implementing the plan to resolve circular debt, which is not allowing the energy tariffs to come down apart from other reasons. And the issue about not being able to unleash the potential of wind energy is important. And for this greater inter-institutional coordination is desired. I, of course, in my own capacity, see a lot of hope in all this discussion. And now that government is driving and backing this agenda, we are mindful that investors in this space, including the second phase of Cpec portfolio, prioritizes clean energy. And NICA has, of course, already started the pre-audit of energy plans and initiatives which could be scaled up in near future. And then finally, I think there is a need for all federal and provincial policies to complement each other. We see provincial industrial policies, provincial investment policies, strategic trade policy framework by the Commerce Ministry, textile policy, which has just been, the framework of which has just been approved. And I see a lot of opportunities if these policies, these sectoral policies can complement each other and embed renewable energy considerations going forward. So these are just very brief remarks, and it's back to you, Dr. Hina. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vakar, for nicely summing up the discussion and the key highlights of today's webinar. It's just not like I mentioned, it will not end here. And we envisioned a network and coalition to make all these efforts and to counter all these challenges collectively. So in that respect, if I could again move on to my presentation page where I could show the, I think if the MIS team could please allow me, and all of you could see my screen. That
we can see your screen, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. So in supporting this clean energy transition in Pakistan, and having all these issues being addressed and to be addressed collectively and complementing each other in these efforts paving a way forward, we have initially proposed the three subgroups that would be able to support us in different capacities. The one is Renewable Energy Working Group, particularly in the area of expertise of renewable energy from both technology and the policy side, the role of academia and the role of NGOs and CSOs and the public institutions. Then the corporate sustainability group in terms of when we are talking about private sector and having their commitments of corporate social responsibilities and their efforts to help these issues to be addressed and to be highlighted. The third one is natural capital impact, where we are considering the impacts on the ecological side, the environment side, the socioeconomic perspective, and how we can bridge all these, those coalitions and the contributions of these groups to make the collective efforts and kind of work for each other, work with each other towards the policy measures, towards technological measures and innovations that are needed. So the purpose is to facilitate and support the government to the ongoing challenges Pakistan has faced throughout these years. But it's really important, especially when with the exaggerated impacts of COVID-19 now, it's really important to consider all these aspects into our future strategies and implementation, as well as the action plans. So with this, I will leave here, but not the least, we will be circulating an email with a questionnaire. Thank you so much to all the participants and the attendees who have participated in our online polls. And also we'll be sharing those on social media and also through emails as well, with the thread for you to be able to please guide us and help us making this, to strengthen this framework, to strengthen this network, to take this forward. So we have started with our evidence, and we would like all these today's in contributions that have been enlightened by all the panelists, and also moving on, it will be a continued process, and the dynamic document will act as an evidence for any of the knowledgeable and practicable actions that are needed to be taken by all the relevant stakeholders, as well as for the better future and sustainable development in Pakistan. With this, thank you so much to all the panelists, to all the for their expert opinions and their contributions, and we really hope and wish to take this forward and to remain in touch for further collaboration and your continuous support. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much to Christoph, who has joined all the way from Beijing and has enlightened us on the classification of moving forward with this, along with very committed people who have given the valuable time today to enrich us with not just the knowledge, but also the way forward and the recommendations. So thank you so much, and we look forward to see you next time. Thank you so much.